Funding for the Hinckley Report is made possible in part by the George S. and Delora Story Eccles Foundation and the Cleone Peterson Eccles Endowment Fund.
Tonight on the Hinckley Report, President Trump gives his first official State of the Union. How are Utahns responding to his call for bipartisanship? What accomplishments from his first year were highlighted? And for year two, what initiatives will he move forward? State lawmakers wrap up the second week of the legislative session. How are lawmakers tackling major issues? What topics have grabbed the public's attention? And how are legislators handling the record number of bills? Good evening, and welcome to the Hinckley Report. I'm Jason Perry, director of the Hinckley Institute of Politics. Covering the week, we have Pat Jones, CEO of the Women's Leadership Institute and former state senator, Robert Gehrke, news columnist with the Salt Lake Tribune, and Rod Arquette, host of The Rod Arquette Show. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
I want to start with a national speech that people were reacting to here in Utah. President Trump gave his first official State of the Union speech. Many people were watching that. Some people in Utah were watching the Jazz game, but we all got to the State of the Union eventually. Senator Jones, let's start with you for just a moment. What were you hoping to see in this speech?
Well, what I was hoping to hear would have been something that I would love to have seen him do in the last year, and that is to be bipartisan. But I heard it, but I wasn't quite sure that, in fact, it matched the behavior.
Well, Rod, he said that a couple times, too. This is time to put our differences aside.
He tried.
Well, in practice, though, legislatively for the past year, as Pat mentioned, everything has been just Republicans trying to ram something through, whether it's an Obamacare repeal or a tax cut. There hasn't been any, or even on immigration issues, there hasn't been any real effort toward bipartisanship, I don't think. Now, maybe he's seeing the writing on the wall. Maybe he's bracing for a bad election in 2018 and realizes he's going to have to sort of reach out to the other party a little bit more. But the words don't match the practice, I don't think, that we've seen in the first year.
But see, I think in his mind he was reaching out. This is his way of reaching out in the sense that he was trying to say, look at the economy and what we've accomplished in the economy. We can do it. We can do other things as well. My sense is he thought he was reaching out. He tried to reach out, and I don't think it was perceived that way. I think a lot of people are saying, no, that's not reaching out. That's not what they were looking for. But in his mind, in the White House mind, he was reaching out to him.
Well, and the bridges have been burned a little bit, too, because you saw the reaction from the Democrats, the way I think Dana Milbank, the Washington Post columnist, said their behavior was embarrassing, the sort of the disdain they showed for the president during the speech. And so, bipartisanship is a nice word.
But I think what we're looking for is something inspirational and aspirational, and I'm not sure that he has the credibility for many people to do that.
Was that the problem? That's interesting, because he said some of the right words, but as all of you indicated, and Robert was even showing, a significant portion of the audience was not even standing up, and in fact, at one point, even booed when he started talking about immigration. So is the problem that the baggage that came before and the wonderment about what's going to happen next? Is that really what the problem is? I mean, and if that's the case, what does he do?
You know, I don't think the Democrats did themselves any good during that speech, because I think a lot of Americans, like Robert just said, and Britt Hume, I think, on Fox News said, they all look like their dog just died, to be real honest. I mean, common decency, if nothing else, would be at least you show a little respect. Now, he hasn't shown them a lot of respect over time as well. But in that forum, the common decency would say, at least on some of these issues, at least we can get behind you, And Senator Manchin was the only one who stood up a couple of times and clapped. All the others sat there. As a matter of fact, there was a picture that came out yesterday. One of them was playing Candy Crush on their cell phone during the speech. And it's like, come on, folks. I think middle America was looking at this saying, wait a minute here.
But
this is
I'm
an
not sure
example.
it's much different this year than it has been when there have been Republican presidents do it, when George Bush and some others. But I think the partisan divide is much
so
larger.
So you think it was, because it is common for that to happen, it is the other side, but you feel like it was
worse?
worse?
I'm not excusing it. I mean, I think that's true. I think we need to respect the presidency, whether you like or dislike the president
Yeah, I mean,
So-
there's always sort of the one side stands, the other
Yeah.
side sits. That's
Yeah.
sort of a natural flow. We had the congressman, I believe it was 3 years ago, who shouted at Obama, "You lie,"
Yeah.
you know, and so I think the hostility, but the speech, the State of the Union speech, is typically not a political speech. It's usually meant to try to unite people behind some sort of agenda for the coming year, and I guess we'll have to see what happens in terms of if people fall in line behind.
Well,
that.
the polls out today are showing he got a bump from this. Some polls are showing he's up 10 points, which is pretty amazing in some of the polls. You know, what I wish would happen, because we all talked a little bit earlier, if you read the speech, it's a good speech, but the interruptions, I think, get a lot of people. You know, if he would start, I would love to see him someday start a State of the Union and said, look, I've got 20 minutes prepared. I'm going to deliver it. I don't want any clapping. If you want to clap at the end, that's fine. But let's get through this and let's get over with this thing.
No politician
Hold
ever.
your applause,
hold
but
your
that,
applause.
that would never happen.
That's too authentic.
That's too authentic. Yeah.
Well, let's get into a couple of the substantive things from this speech, and you brought up a couple. One on the economy, and I'm really curious about your analysis of this, because the economy seems to be doing pretty well. 69% of people in the state of Utah think the economy is great, and they approve of it. But in Utah and nationwide, Donald Trump's in the 30 to 40% in terms of his approval. What is that disconnect there?
I think the disconnect is him.
Yeah.
You know, the policies, I mean, may be great. You have now a corporate cut so that's significant. I think there's a lot of people that disapprove of what happened, but I think overall, I know Utah's doing very well, and I think the rest of the country's hoping to do better.
Robert, he took credit for it, right?
Of course he's going to take credit for it. Barack Obama took credit for it too, and so and to the extent to some extent they can take credit for that, but President Trump inherited an economy that was growing. It's not growing at the pace that he said in the speech that it is, but it is growing, and I think people recognize that, and they like to see their paychecks, they like to see their 401ks improving, those that still have 401ks left, I guess, but and so he will continue to take credit for that as long as the economy is going up. If it turns down, then he's going to have to find somebody else to blame.
You know, I think in the economy, a lot of this, and I've always thought about this, so much emotion is involved in economic growth. If you personally feel good about what's going on, your wallet looks good, your paycheck looks good, you're going to feel good about the economy. And I think people are seeing that. The number today I saw, I think it's now up to 305, maybe 365 companies have given their employees bonuses, have raised their wages, or helped their 401ks. Well, that's impacting a lot of Americans, and it just makes them feel good about things. And I think that's what's driving a lot of this. I agree with Rob. I don't know how much a president really can do on the overall economy. I mean, they all take credit for it, but I think can they create this feeling in the country that things are going well, at least economically for him? And I think the difference between the economic numbers and his personal numbers really go back to how he performs. I mean, he is a bull in the china shop, and a lot of people like it, and a lot of people don't like it.
Well,
So.
if I could I think the tone of the speech was important for that reason, because he has been seen as the bull in the china shop. And so if you can stand on that stage and appear presidential, actually it's probably hard to not stand in front of the Speaker of the House and the Vice President and not appear presidential. But at the same time, if you can perform on that stage and appear presidential and strike a tone that is more rational than his Twitter rants, then I think that's going to help his approval numbers.
Yeah, I think even our own Mia Love said something similar, saying if he can keep that speech inside his tweets, we might be okay.
But it's not going to happen.
But you noticed, for a few days, we didn't get any tweets from him. I think the first one we've seen now is today.
There's a pause, maybe.
There was a little pause, and that may be Kelly saying, you did well here. Don't mess it up for a few days, and I don't think he has.
Okay.
And I think a lot of people have issues that, was it really his speech or was it someone else's speech that he read or tried to read? So
I think we have to address for just a moment one of the more controversial parts of this speech when he started talking about immigration. This is a big issue in the country. Utahns are watching this closely, and he had a four-part approach, and some of those were things that both sides of the aisle tend to agree with, which like protection for the dreamers. But then he got to things like chain immigration, and that's when he started getting some boos. How do you separate these, Senator, for him when we have to resolve this issue, but there is no consensus on all of that?
can someone tell him that chain immigration is a term that is really detrimental for a lot of people that came here in chains? I just think the sensitivity is not there. He needs to either be trained or it needs to be authentic. Mm-hmm. But I just feel that his his inner core is not where most presidents have been. And so I think it's such a change for people to try and match that.
Rod, in terms of a strategy, because he linked all of these things again to the wall, right? This is the leverage point. Some things we all care about, the dreamers, some things we disagree on, all tied to the wall. Is he going to get that?
I don't know if he's going to get. He's going to push it. I mean, that was number one on his campaign pledge and promise to Americans. Is he going to get it? He's asking for $25 billion in trust. He wants the money up front. He doesn't want somebody to approve it. But the other side of the equation that nobody has taken a look at is how much will it cost us to take these dreamers or these DACA recipients and create either a pathway to legal status or a pathway to citizenship. There's a cost involved there, and you have to. And I hear the costs are about the same. So where the money for that is going to come from is going to be real interesting. Will the wall be built? He's going to push for it as much. He has to, because the voters are his supporters are expecting him to build that wall.
Well, but he can't even articulate what the wall is anymore. I mean, it's morphed from this like concrete 15-foot high wall that is an actual physical wall. To some places it's going to be technology. We're going to use drones and cameras and things, which we already kind of have down there. He's said Mexico's going to pay for it. Now he wants $25 billion in taxpayer money that he thinks Mexico's somehow going to pay back, and has been told in very explicit terms that that's not going to happen. And so, you know, the messaging on the wall has been poor. I mean, it's a divisive issue, obviously, in the first place, and you've got issues of geography down in Texas, and rivers and mountains and private property that you have to deal with. I mean, I know it's a promise he made, and I don't think it would be the first time that a politician can't follow through on his campaign promises. But it seems almost impossible that we're going to end up with a complete wall from point to point anytime in this administration.
He never has defined what he means by the wall. Is it the concrete barriers? Is it a combination? That's what we have to wait and see, because as Robert pointed out, some areas the wall doesn't make any sense.
Let's turn to our legislature. The second week is coming to a close, and there are a couple interesting bills that seem to be tackling these initiatives, seem to be touching on those. We have several initiatives. I want to talk about two of them. One is the Count My Vote initiative, and House Bill 68 has come out, even though there's sort of this compromise and this agreement that is going to say, candidate, you get to pick your track, not both. Robert? Are they trying to preempt it? Was there something clever going on here?
Well, this is something that Representative Fossen tried to add to the bill last year at the very end of the session, and ended up dying. The sponsor of the bill, Senator Bramble, who actually sponsored the Count My Vote compromise bill in 2014, he ended up just killing the bill instead of having this go through. The idea is that if conventions are going to have any viability, any realistic impact on politics, they need to have people that actually want to go to them. And as we saw with the John Curtis race, there's really not much reason for people to go to the conventions anymore. He finished 5th, I believe, in the Utah County Convention, or in the 4th District, and then ended up winning the seat. So, I think this is an attempt by people who want to maintain some sort of semblance of viability for the conventions to, kind of keep it afloat. I think the writing's on the wall, though. I mean, I think the Count My Vote initiative would completely get rid of the convention process, and I don't think the Senate's going to go along with anything that is going to, with Representative Fossen's bill if it comes over there.
Yeah, well, Senator Bramble came out, I think it was just yesterday, and said this thing is DOA in the Senate. I mean, from his point of view, I think I had Fossen on my radio show. I didn't understand quite what he was trying to do as he tried to explain this. I mean, what is he trying to do here? And he said, like you pointed out, Robert, the House proved it in the final minutes of the legislature last year, but he couldn't get the Senate to go along. I don't think the Senate will go along with it this year either.
The nominating process is really harming our system. I train women to run for office, and it's the number one issue for many women is how do I get on the ballot? And it's very detrimental to our process to have to go through so many hoops to get on the ballot. So, we need to do something to make it easier.
I have been a state delegate a couple of times now, and I like the caucus convention system, the way it works. But is it limiting? Who knows? I mean,
I guess we'll see.
It is limiting,
But is this something you think we're just going to keep doing session after session? At what point are we just done having this conversation? Robert?
Well, I think if the Count My Vote initiative passes convincingly, I think then that's sort of the last word. I think anything after that would be seen as trying to tinker with the voters, go against the voters' will. I think the governor would have problems with that, and I think the legislature would be hard-pressed to make substantive revisions to that.
Speaking of tinkering, there's another very interesting discussion our friends at Utah Policy started talking about recently on marijuana. Some efforts our legislature might be trying to do to kind of impact that initiative that seems to have a lot of momentum. Rod, I think they call it SB 54ing.
Yeah, I saw that number yesterday. They can try all they want, but I think the voters out there, the polls show still very strong support for medical marijuana and the initiative out there. The people I talk to who are really pushing hard for this are tired of the argument about research, and they'll say how much more research needs to be done. And I think the SB 54ing that they're looking at is saying, we'll do everything you want to do, but let's hold off till we get the research. Supporters are saying we've had enough research. Let's just get going with this. And that's the argument that they're going to have to make to the public and see how the public responds to it.
Is this an effective way to try to preempt at least the timing of that initiative, Robert?
Well, I think it's worked before. I think if the legislature can show that maybe they're doing something, then it takes some of the wind out of the sails of this thing. And I don't think the marijuana initiative is the only one we're going to see these attempts with. I mean, there are 5 initiatives, 6 perhaps, that are headed toward the ballot. I think you might see them trying to tinker with others as well. Yeah. The concern they have, and I've heard this expressed from legislative leaders, not just this year, but in past years, is they don't like the initiative process because they think it's a blunt tool. They like to be able to kind of massage and shape these bills with input and as they go through the process. An initiative, you put it in, you file it, and that's what people vote on, yes or no, and there's not an amendment opportunity. So they're going to, I think they will try to do something to try to undercut the marijuana issue. I think they'll probably try to do something to undercut the boundaries, the redistricting initiative, and I think they're already trying to do something to undermine the Our Schools Now initiative that would raise taxes. I mean, they want it to look like they're putting a lot of money into schools already, so that takes some of the steam out of those. So there's an active effort, I think, to try to push those back.
Okay. Apparently, I'm going to stick on a tinkering theme for a moment. Okay. All right. A new statue proposed in Statutory Hall in Washington, D.C. Of course, we have Brigham Young, Philo T. Farnsworth. But this resolution passed this week, Senator Jones, to replace Philo T. Farnsworth with a very well-known and very important person, Martha Hughes Cannon, here in the state of Utah. Talk about that. Just a little bit, the why and the significance of this movement.
I don't think many people understand how important it is to women in particular to have a prominent woman acknowledged like that. As I look back to my grandmothers, my own grandmothers, when they were young mothers themselves, did not have the right to vote. Can you imagine that? Your grandmothers, and to have someone of such great prominence like Martha Hughes Cannon run for the Senate, beat her husband, and
not many people know that she actually ran for the state Senate, beat her husband.
Yeah. So I just think it means a lot to women and men. I think it's time we did it. Philo Farnsworth was a wonderful scientist, and we certainly have acknowledged him, but I think it's time to have a woman in Congress.
Well, such an amazing figure for the state. Doctor, her efforts on women's suffrage was amazing. The first state senator in the whole country. So it wasn't just important for Utah, but for the country as well.
And having the people up in Rigby, Idaho said, we'll take his statue. Isn't that where he was born, I believe? And bring the statue to us, and we'll put it in our city hall.
And I think it's interesting, if you look at the other women's statues who are in Statuary Hall, it's people like Helen Keller and Sacagawea, and these very prominent women in U.S. history, and I think Martha Hughes Cannon deserves a place there.
Yeah, absolutely right. And we have a great statue around the Capitol, so it's been a very interesting time, and I think we're going to see more of that in the next couple of weeks. I want to talk about one final piece of interesting information. Robert, you wrote about this, all right? Yeah. So we're starting to get constitutional notes about bills, and there are 1,277 of these bills. Yeah. That's a It's a little bit of reading, but sometimes they give a note that said this has a high likelihood of being held unconstitutional. Tell us what's happening with that in the Senator from your time in the Senate. Does anyone really care if someone says not constitutional? Those are the two questions I'll tell you in advance.
Yeah, so over the years they've kind of made it harder and harder for legislative attorneys to put these constitutional notes on. So now it's a high probability that the bill would be held unconstitutional by the courts, and it's an advisory to legislators that, as Brian King put it when he's talking about one bill in particular, we're buying ourselves a lawsuit if we pass this. And typically that's absolutely right. Now that doesn't mean they don't pass them, and a lot of times the legislature thinks that either they need to make a statement and take a stand, or else that they know the Constitution better than these attorneys that they're paying for, and so they go ahead and pass them anyway. But typically there's usually 4 or 5 bills a year that end up with a constitutional note. Bills, for example, like the medical marijuana bill, have had constitutional notes on them because there is drug regulation is a federal issue. This year, Representative Lisenby's bill that would make it illegal for a doctor to perform an abortion on a woman who has a child with Down syndrome, a fetus with Down syndrome, if that's the only reason they're doing it. They said, there was a similar law, an identical law actually in Indiana, that was struck down by the courts there. It's been passed and challenged in other states, and it would probably violate Roe versus Wade and would be unconstitutional. It still passed the House, and so it does, I think, make legislators stop for a bit, and Senator Jones can speak to this.
Did it make you stop?
You know what? We didn't have. Yeah. To me, these are message bills. I really get my hair on fire when I see this. I think they ought to put the dollar bill signs along with the constitutional notes to see how much they would, guess how much it's going to cost taxpayers to run those kinds of bills. It's really just gotten off.
How often do you think what Robert says right? These are mostly just sending a message.
I think it is most of the time.
Mostly.
Is it like, I think the medical marijuana one would be one that again, that one had a constitutional note on it, and I don't think that would necessarily be just a message bill. There was, but they, take back our lands, public, return the public lands to Utah had a long constitutional note on it, and they went ahead and passed that, and they're throwing up to $14 million behind the effort to do that. So at some point it stops being a message and starts being reality. But I think, as Senator Jones said, you kind of have to. They should probably include we're going to fund $1 million for these court costs, and when the state loses these, they don't only pay their court costs, they end up paying the plaintiff's court costs as well in a lot of cases.
Maybe what you're saying is right. It's more than just a constitutional note and a fiscal note. There's
put some banknotes behind it.
Yeah,
right?
banknotes behind that. Very interesting point. We've talked on this show about something about reality coming to be. Mitt Romney, we have to talk about again. Big tweet. I like to show a graphic and then ask you what you think about it. Mitt Romney sent this out yesterday. Looking forward to making an announcement on February 15th about the Utah Senate race.
What could it be?
What could that be, Robert?
I'm taking bets on anyone who will say he's not going to run. Because, we all know what this is all about. Just do it and let's get moving.
Well, we'll have our Valentine's card still there, so we'll still have the hearts and flowers.
Bringing us
so that's what it is, huh?
Yeah.
So go ahead, Robert.
I think maybe he's going to call all these reporters together and say, I just decided not to do it, and say thank you, but no thank you.
I've gathered all of you here together to tell you I'm not interested.
That's not. Yet.
Or maybe he's going to announce that from now on he wants to be called Matilda. Right? Yeah. He's going to.
Coined here first. Thanks for that, Robert. So one of the questions that people are asking after they just say, okay, so he's going to do this, is how does he handle President Trump? Okay, so Senator Jones, you're advising him.
Well, I think he's already handled him by some of the things he said with the back screen of the Hinckley Institute, right?
That's where he did it. Yes,
we have a lot of tape, a lot of recording that shows that. So I think a lot of people say which Mitt Romney would show up, and I'm hoping it would be the John McCain type, the Lindsey Graham type, that would actually challenge, some of these egregious things that I think that are going on in Congress.
Rod, is that what he does? He comes in.
He's going to have to make that decision as to which direction he's going to go in. I mean, he's really. Callers into my show are still very upset with what he did here at the Hinckley Institute of Politics.
I get both sides.
They're still very, very upset by that, and they thought that was a very cheap shot. He's got a decision to make, and there are all kinds of rumors. He's going to go for a majority leadership post. Some are saying he's sitting on the sidelines waiting to see if Trump implodes in 2020, and he'll come in as the savior of the Republican Party and run for a third time as president. So there's all kind of speculation as to what he's going to do here. To Utah voters, I think they need to really ask him, what are you going to do for me in the Senate? You know, quit the you're going to get national attention every time Trump does something that may offend people. Everybody's going to run to Mitt to get the comment. How often is he going to do that? I think the people of Utah have a right to ask him, if you're running for Senate, what are your priorities for the people of Utah, and what are you going to fight for?
Yeah, I mean, I think Rod's exactly right. I think it's going to be on a case-by-case basis, and to kind of follow on Pat's Valentine's, Mitt Romney's like a box of chocolates. You don't know what you're going to get, right? He could be. There are a lot of issues, tax reform, for example, that he's praised the president on. I don't think you're going to see much daylight between the president and Mitt Romney on issues like taxes, but it's going to be more a question of his style and criticizing his style. You know, but I think Rod also raises an interesting point about what it means for Utah to have a freshman senator who's throwing bombs at the White House, taking Orrin Hatch's place, who said he's the greatest president, might be the greatest president in history. It's going to be a big departure there and a big loss in clout. But also with the retirement of people, with people like Jeff Flake and others, Bob Corker, Mitt Romney is going to be one of the last remaining, Republican critics on that side of the aisle. So I think it's going to be on a case-by-case basis, and he'll have to pick and choose his battles.
I hope he gets challenged on the Republican side. I don't know if anyone will step up, but I hope he does get challenged, because I get a sense we've got a coronation taking place in this state for Mitt Romney right now, and I think he should be challenged. I hope the Democrat, if it's Jenny Wilson, challenges him, but I think Republicans need to challenge him as well on a number of key issues.
But I think our polls showed he would beat Jenny Wilson by 45 points. It's he's very
tough.
Yeah.
We'll watch that one. Wait for Valentine's and the Mitt Romney announcement. Thank you very much for your thoughts. That's it for tonight's show. The conversation continues online at kued.org/Hinckley Report. We'll see you next week. Thank you and good night.